Hello, 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 it's Becky and Christian, and we are driving home from Maine, where we have spent the weekend at Maine's Lighthouse Day, touring lighthouses and just enjoying some beautiful, beautiful scenery. And now that we're driving home, I am reading the book that Talon bought for me. It's called Haunted Maine Lighthouses, and I'd recommend you pick it up if you're heading to Maine because it's pretty fun. And we're actually reading about one of the lighthouses that we saw while we were in Maine. It is the Portland Headlight Lighthouse, and it is supposedly dangerous beauty. But I figured I'll take you on the ride with me, and you can read with me as as we drive. So there we go. We're on page 5. And it's Let There Be Light. And we're not going to read the whole book, obviously. This is just little excerpts. But this is just the lighthouse that we saw. So I thought it was pretty interesting. So as is the case with many lighthouses, going back to ancient times, Portland Head's installation was a reactionary measure to disaster. Well, that makes sense. Between 1780 and 1990, at least 100 vessels were estimated to have wrecked upon Cape Elizabeth's coast, and the local has been said to have a superstitious aura for mariners. Between 1870 and 1890, I just read the same paragraph again. One example of the area's treacherous waters occurred on June 26, 1863, when Civil War's northernmost naval battle was waged just off its shores. Under the cloak of night, Confederate Lieutenant Charles W. Reed and his crew snuck into Portland and boarded the well-armed U.S. cutter Caleb Casey. They intended to sail it out of port and then back onto the city. But long after commandeering the ship, not long after commandeering the ship, they were betrayed by the harbor's boisterous tides, and they were easily overtaken and captured by Portland's forces. Locals long clamored for a lighthouse on Cape Elizabeth, growing particularly agitated in February of 1787. It was then that a 90-ton sloop heading south from Sheepscot on the mid-coast wrecked on Cushing Island, located about a mile from where Portland Headlight now stands. The captain and a young boy drowned, and the remainder of his crew escaped on floating wreckage. The following wreck, the Cumberland Gazette, demanded, "Does not this unhappy accident evidence the necessity of having a lighthouse at the entrance of the harbor?" Well, that makes sense. The light was eventually commissioned by Washington before either the federal government or Maine existed. The state would remain part of Massachusetts until 1820 and was constructed partly of local rubble stone. Yet Portland Head couldn't quell all catastrophes. Desperate measures called for it to be raised 90 years later in February of 1864. The Bohemian, on its way to Liverpool, broke apart upon its rocks. The 218 passengers and crew escaped in lifeboats. One of those dories, however, was swamped, and 40 were drowned. Ooh. And there is unhappiness.
A jeep and a truck.
A jeep and a truck. Ooh. Talking about wrecks. Humans in the worst of times are not much more than vultures of other scavengers of the animal kingdom, and it is said that women from around Casco Bay collected the bolts of yarn, wool, satin, and silk that washed ashore after the wreck. What's that? Hartford. Well, we're coming up on Hartford, guys. Following the tragedy, the light was raised yet another 20 feet, but all the wrecks it had witnessed over the years, and that of Annie C. McGuire in 1886 was perhaps the most particular. Just a few days before the disaster, the local sheriff paid a visit to a lighthouse keeper, Joshua Stout. He foretold a 3-masted schooner headed for Quebec, asking him to keep an eye out for him because it was slated for seizure by American creditors. Then on Christmas Eve, a ship bound for Buenos Aires smashed into the ledges of Cape Elizabeth, shaking the lighthouse and the keeper dwelling with the impact. Reacting quickly, the keeper, Strout, who, it was said, kept a parrot that warmed him when foul weather was ahead, and his son Joseph rigged up an emergency lights and a rope chair to haul the crew, captain, and his wife ashore. Once on dry land, Captain Daniel O'Neill discovered that a satchel had been on board, holding all of the ship's money and papers. It was inexplicably missing. Panicked, he whispered to his wife, who advised that he shut up and pretend it had been lost. So the story goes, she had hidden it and all its contents inside her hat box before rescuers hauled her onto land via the rope swing. Although the sheriff did eventually come by and search the ship, the pair abandoned with their take. Its creditors received compensation at an auction, but nothing even close to the riches that the couple stole. A classic sepia image of the ship's demise shows the bark, devoid of its sails, lifted sideways and rested upon the rocks just below the majestic lighthouse. The wreck is further memorialized with a simple epitaph painted on the rock wall
in half a mile, keep right to stay on I-84.
Below the sidewall, first set down in a stark black and white by Joseph Stout, listing simply the ship's name and the date. While no one knows for sure what happened to the captain or the lost treasure, the Annie McGuire remains one of the most
right to stay on I-84
and puzzling shipwrecks in Maine's history. Okay, that's enough for now. We're going to read on a little bit more about the Portland Lighthouse.
Continue on I-84 for 66 miles.
So keep on with us. We got 66 miles left.